So I hope everybody had a very Merry Christmas. Throughout the Advent season, we've been talking about how we can use the rules of St. Benedict, the rules that he laid out for his monks to live together in a loving community, how we could use those rules to help us to form more loving families, to form a more loving community. Last week, we talked about how we could learn from the school of the Holy Family, learn through them about the importance of prayer, contemplation in our daily lives. And today we come together to celebrate the feast of the Holy Family. It's interesting here how on this feast of the Holy Family, the church gives us a reading from the letter of Paul to the Colossians, where he talks about the importance of obedience. He tells wives to be subordinate to their husbands, and he tells children to be obedient to their parents. You know, a lot of times that becomes controversial, right? The wives, be subordinate to your husbands. We look at St. Paul as being sexist in today's time. Of course, in his letter to the Ephesians, he does tell husbands and wives to be subordinate to each other. But more importantly, both in this letter to the Colossians and in the letter to the Ephesians, he tells husbands to love your wives. And that's really what it's about. In the letter to the Ephesians, he even tells the husbands to love their wives as Christ loves the church. And we know how Christ loved the church. He loved it so much that he died on the cross for us. He sacrificed himself for us. So he's telling the husbands to love their wives the way Christ loved the church, to sacrifice themselves for their wives and their families. When I review these letters with the couples that are getting married, I love to tell them, yeah, sure, Paul tells the wives to be subordinate to their husbands, but they get off easy. He tells the husbands that they have to die for their wife. But the focus here is on obedience, right? Obedience becomes the heart of what makes a good family. Obedience is what brings us together as a church. Obedience is what brings us together as a community. And as we've talked about before, this obedience is not a blind obedience. And St. Benedict talked about obedience. He was going back to the root of the word, where in Latin it comes from to hear, to listen. And that's what obedience is all about. Obedience is all about listening, for the leaders to love the people they are leading, right? So that's why in the letter that Paul gave to the Colossians, he tells the husbands to love their wives, to love their families, because that's where obedience has to start. It has to start out of love there. And so it's important for the parents to love their children. And yes, for the children to be obedient to their parents, but to do it because they realize that the parents have their best interest at heart. Obedience is important, that to listen within the family, to listen within the church. The teachings of the church are given to us out of love, given to us to help us to improve our life. And so we look to obedience, not out of blind obedience, but an obedience to follow those who know more than us, who have contemplated these things, and to look upon it as a way for us to grow in the love of God. And so that is why we're obedient in our families, obedient within our church, and most importantly, obedient to God, discerning His will for us in our lives and acting upon that will.